Hey everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of me, William Wallis, and my show, William Wallis for America. And as I always like to tell you, I'm traveling the state here in Louisiana to talk to our elected officials about things that are going on in our state. And we always try to do it in the best way possible to inform people and keep people interested. And today's guest with me, I think you'll find very interesting. It's one of our statewide elected officials here doing some work for us. I'm going to bring him on, Insurance Commissioner Jim Donelon. Thank you so much for being on today. I really appreciate it.
Be with you, William, indeed. A fellow Jeffersonian.
Exactly right.
And an enthusiastic pro-American.
I love it. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Indeed.
Well, you know, it's one of my reasons for doing this show is because in our country, I think that one of the best things that we can do to be good Americans, be good citizens, is to find ways to improve our country by focusing on our communities and our state, and because of that, our country will follow. And that's the best way to be patriotic.
No doubt about it. And we have so much to offer. And we have built the greatest country, the freest country, the most democratic country in the history of the world. And yet it's not perfect. We all know that, and it will get better. It always has. But there's much to be proud of, much to defend.
And we got good people like you,
thank you.
That's doing some things to help defend some of the things in our state, and I want to point that out. But as insurance commissioner, I always have to say, some people, you know, my friends will come up to me sometimes and they'll say, oh, everybody knows what the Secretary of State does or the insurance commissioner does, but not everybody does, and that's why we're here today to tell people a little bit about what you do. So what does the insurance commissioner do?
Well, the insurance commissioner in all 50 states, plus the 5 district and territories that all have an insurance commissioner, because the regulation of insurance since the mid-40s, when the McCarran-Ferguson Act was passed, a very simple one-paragraph act passed by Congress in the aftermath of a Supreme Court decision, says that insurance shall be regulated at the state level. And everyone says they strongly support that. Democrats, when I was president of the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, I had the occasion to meet with then President Obama in the Oval Office, had a conversation with him, told him about some challenges we were having at the international level and some disagreements with the Treasury Department, who had their eye on regulation of insurance as they do other aspects of the financial market in
So they were going to try to get out of the McCarran-Ferguson Act and try to find another
approach over into insurance regulation. And I expressed that concern to the then president, and he said since his days as a state senator, he has always been totally supportive of regulating insurance at the state level. The Democrats say that almost to a person, and the Republicans say that almost to a person. The consumer groups say it, and the industry groups say it. They want to keep regulation of insurance at the state level. My mission, as well as my 54 colleagues around the country, is to make insurance affordable and available, and at the same time that we're doing that, protect consumers. Those are our 3 charges. Make it affordable, make it available, and protect consumers who need that insurance, who pay an awful lot of money for it, who are intimidated by the complexity of it, and therefore the need for someone, in this case, in this area, at the state level, an 800 number away from being reached out to, that they can go to with their concerns, questions, problems, what have it.
What's interesting is how everything comes back to the state level. You know, now I like to point out my mission is always work in our communities to help improve our states, our country will follow. However, we always go back to the 10th Amendment one way or the other. And when you look at all the state laws, especially there's a lot in the legislature right now that's coming up, you find how common it is to be able to go back to the state level, which is a mirror image of what our 10th Amendment is in our Constitution.
No question.
So I think that's very interesting.
That's right. All things not delegated to the United States Congress, to the federal government, are reserved to the states by that 10th Amendment. And that has been encroached upon significantly
Exactly.
over the years by, I guess it's just opportunity to do so, generally in the response to some crisis.
Right.
Whether it was 9/11 or World War II or the Great Depression or the Great Recession, the federal government, with all of its resources, tends to be the one that everyone looks to for their answer to those
because they have the printing
challenges.
machines.
They have the printing
They
machines.
can print the money.
They have the armies and
Right.
the navies. They have a lot of resources that state governments do not. But the Constitution says that those powers not granted by that Constitution to the federal government are reserved to the states. And in addition to that, McCarran-Ferguson, an act of Congress, further made it clear that insurance shall be regulated at the state level. And as I said before, all sides are in agreement that that's in the best interest of consumers as well as the insurance industry itself.
Especially since every state has its own unique set of circumstances, problems, or industries that the insurance commissioner would know better how to treat the insurance companies in this area and the people there as citizens, unlike they would if they were trying to do something in California.
Absolutely. And you said their own resources and abilities, et cetera. And one other thing they have that is really important is their own institutional knowledge from their experiences. And that results in what we call the laboratory of states, where we get to watch and see what another state did in that particular crisis or situation, how they handled it, how they recovered from it, and the rest of us states can then live by or learn from that model, that experience that our sister state had with wildfires or hurricanes or, as we had last year, a derecho, a land hurricane.
Oh, that's right.
That went through the Midwest and cost $15 billion in insured losses in the Midwest. A huge, bigger than our 5 named storms that made landfall in Louisiana last year. So those experiences really benefit all of us from a learning point of view.
To be able to work together, look together at that. Well, what is your background before you became insurance commissioner?
Well, I was born and raised in Mid-City, New Orleans.
Okay.
Lived in half of a shotgun double until the day I left that shotgun double to go marry my wife. She and I have lived in Jefferson Parish since we married in 1968. I went to Jesuit High School, the University of New Orleans, and Loyola School of Law. Met my wife at the University of New Orleans in an English class. Raised my 4 daughters there in Metairie, out by Lake Pontchartrain, in the home we still reside in. We built it in 1975. Actually, my father-in-law, bless his soul, built it for us. And my wife tells me that I'll die there, and I'm okay with that.
Okay with that, right?
That's fine by me. She loves her garden and her neighborhood and her neighbors, as I do. It's been a great environment to raise a family, to have access to and utilize and enjoy the lakefront, the linear park, as we called it when I held my first public office, which was chairman of the Jefferson Parish Council from 1975 to 79. In 1982, I got elected to the State House of Representatives, representing Metairie and Kenner in a lakefront Metairie district. Did that for 19 years, and then came here to the Department of Insurance as the chief deputy to the then commissioner, acting commissioner, who had taken over from his boss, who had become our 3rd consecutive insurance commissioner in our state to go to federal prison. And unfortunately, we have a reputation throughout the insurance world for that
For those three.
Yeah.
Well, they say things happen in threes, so
That's true.
hopefully that will be the end of it.
That's true.
We can put that in a lockbox.
Yes, and we haven't yet had 3 not go so as to maybe jinx the fourth one
Right, yeah, exactly. Right.
for a return. I'm still the second who has not gone off to the big house. So I came here as chief deputy in '01 and stayed in that role until my predecessor resigned, and I took office shortly after Katrina and Rita hit our state. And I had to run for the unexpired term in '06, got elected, and have been reelected 4 times, '07, '11, 15, and 19 after that. In addition, over my career, I have served in the Louisiana Army National Guard.
Okay, thank you for your service.
Thank you. Did 33 years, retired as the state judge advocate with the rank of colonel, and very much enjoyed that service and that opportunity. Kind of miss it at times. But I find former deputy JAG officers who served under me in all corners of the state, and others who have risen up to become adjutant general, who were majors and captains
during your time,
during my time. And it's a great camaraderie that exists in the military, and in particular in the Guard of the military, National Guard, Army, and Air, where it's state folks serving with each other, first and foremost on behalf of their state, hurricanes and other natural disasters, and then of course in the military role, wherever we are ordered to go.
Yeah, right. Well, that's interesting. I served in the Army National Guard too for 3 years. Yes. You know,
where?
773rd out in Jackson Barracks.
Absolutely.
You know, I was over there for a short time.
Well, that was where I spent the last probably 25 years of my career. I did some time on Moss Street, over off of Bayou St. John.
Yes.
Before being transferred over to Jackson Barracks, which post-Katrina is a whole new campus.
Absolutely.
Federally funded.
Yeah, I've seen, I've driven by out there.
It's great.
It really is.
It's really impressive. So.
Well, I'm glad we get to catch up, because it gives me a chance to let people know that how connected you are to not just your community, but our community and our state, and in such a way that you have that sense of belonging in a community and work with the community, for people. You know, so it sounds to me like you're putting people over politics. It's, with people like yourself who are that attached to the community tend to do a better job at that. So I want to commend you for doing that. But so being aware of that, we got a session going on. Speaking of the people in the state, there's a session that just started this week.
Indeed.
So I know that you're thinking in terms of the people, on this, and there's a lot of legislation going on over there. Is there any legislation that you're connected to?
Oh, yes.
That over there that you'd like to share with people that we can keep an eye on?
Yes, we have 23 actually, pieces of legislation in the hopper introduced on behalf of the Department of Insurance, a few of which are what I call major pieces of legislation.
Well, we go over some of those. That'd be great.
Indeed, yeah. The first is a statute to give me the emergency powers that I have exercised on 4 occasions during my 15 years as the insurance commissioner for our state. Those emergency powers have allowed me to issue emergency rules in limited areas for limited periods of time, in the aftermath of Katrina and Rita in 2006, Isaac 10 years ago, the pandemic a year ago, and Laura and Delta in the aftermath of what happened to our southwest corner, primarily the Lake Charles area of our state, as a result of those hurricanes last year. That power, during the time that I've been insurance commissioner, has been delegated to me by the governors at that time. A Democrat, Kathleen Babineau Blanco, when Katrina and Rita hit, Jindal, a Republican, when Isaac hit, and now John Bell Edwards when the pandemic hit, and then Laura hit shortly thereafter. They declared emergencies as a result of those events, and delegated for insurance powers their emergency power to do the things that we did in those emergency rules. Come to find out, there is frankly, it's questionable. Frankly, we don't think there is authority for the governors to have delegated their emergency powers, because there's nothing in the law that authorizes the governor to delegate to anyone else for any purpose those emergency powers. It is on to him and only him for the limited purposes of that power that was given to him. I remember as a legislator when then Representative Hunt Downer of Houma, Louisiana, who served with me in the Guard, was actually my deputy state judge advocate. And he was there, I was there when 9/11 happened. And he passed the Louisiana version. It's called the Louisiana Homeland Security Act, that first created these emergency powers vested with the governor. But it has turned out that it's needed for me to do what I have to do to protect folks during pandemics or aftermath of hurricanes, et cetera. And so to be sure that we can do that when the next such event comes, we have a bill that empowers me, subject to the oversight of the legislature, to issue emergency rules that suspend the right of companies to cancel policyholders for 90 days because of the disruption in their home area or in their lives during a pandemic, to prevent non-renewal of insurance policies as a result of those emergency conditions, to liberalize access to things like telemedicine during a pandemic, to suspend a law that calls for step therapy, which means you have to go, when in need of medical treatment, you have to go through the steps of the least expensive up to the most expensive, one at a time, with prior approval from your health insurer in order to get coverage. We suspended that because of the justifiable fear everyone had during the past year to be going to and from their doctor, to and from their pharmacy, and with good reason. So we do that judiciously, because if we overreach, we intimidate the companies that, to some extent, when they can't cancel or non-renew, even when you're not paying your premium, they end up eating some uncompensated insurance, because people will take advantage of that limited duration non-cancellation order and get free insurance, and then at the end of the emergency time, when that suspension of cancellation rights goes away, they'll go to some other company and get their coverage. And so not a lot, but
this legislation helps prevent some of that.
No, it does not do that. Unfortunately, I wish we could. What it does is it allows me to continue doing these taking these emergency steps during crisis times, and the companies accept it and cooperate with it, even at their expense.
And what I like to point out, and what I like, and I want to make sure people pick up on this, is that you said in the beginning, questionable, that the spirit of the governor giving you the powers is a good thing, in that it was needed during emergencies. And in the spirit of doing the right thing for people, you did the right thing for people, but also in the spirit of the people and power, you're creating legislation so that way between you and future insurance commissioners, no one can ever take advantage of that power. It's gonna, that you're setting up a way to keep the power in check in the future, and you're doing it on your own.
Well,
you're saying, "Hey, I want to be in check, and I'm going to."
I really do.
Exactly, and you're creating legislation so the people realize you're not power hungry. You want to be in check.
Well,
I like that. That's good legislation.
I appreciate that, William, and I certainly am not power hungry. It's a difficult task, and the bill limits that emergency authority to only areas declared an emergency area by the governor.
See, but specific to those areas.
Exactly, and for only as long as, can be less, but no longer than the duration of the governor's declaration of emergency situations. So, and as I mentioned, importantly, it's all subject to the oversight of the legislature, so that the two insurance committees, if I issue an emergency rule, they get a copy of it at the time that it's issued, and if they have any qualms about it, they can convene a meeting of oversight, it's called, on 1 day's notice, and bring me over and have me defend and explain why I'm doing and what I'm doing, and if they don't approve of it, they can veto, they can shut it down on the next day.
Yeah, this is why I like getting into the nuts and bolts of some of this stuff, because on the outside, somebody might say, "Oh, it's a power grab," but when they look at the legislation, they go, "Well, wait a minute. Didn't have any. His power was basically deemed, and he could use it. And this is basically, putting restraints on that power,
no doubt,
and putting oversight on it in such a way that it's looking out for people, but also." Doing the right thing.
No question.
And
as you recall, I said earlier, my job is to see to it that insurance is affordable and available. And if I overreach in this power, this emergency power arena, for one thing, they're out of here.
Right.
They don't have to do business in our state.
Right.
They have exited insurance, auto insurers in California, property insurers in Florida. They have exited the markets major national companies have in those two huge markets, huge population and economy states of Florida and California, when it was not favorable to do business in those states. They have returned now in a more favorable, more welcoming environment. But in our state, we think of ourselves as a small state.
Right.
I always say we're not really a small state. We're an average state.
Yeah.
We are the average population size, 4.5
Right.
million people. We are the average premium paying state, right in the same vicinity and area
right.
of Alabama, Tennessee, states comparable to us in the insurance world. Now, having said that, one thing that we are outsized in is what's called the surplus lines market. Think of Lloyd's of London,
Okay.
a 300-year-old company, one of the first in the world. And they are a non-admitted carrier in our state. All the major companies that you think of, Liberty Mutual, State Farm, Geico, Allstate, and small regional companies, Southern Fidelity, Lighthouse, United Policyholders, Imperial, Coastal, Gulf Coast, Coastal Insurance Company. Those small regional carriers, as well as the big ones I enumerated, are admitted and licensed to do business in our state. They have protections in place that surplus lines companies don't have, such as a safety net under those companies in the event that they go insolvent, that the guarantee fund, similar to the FDIC, will step in and pay those claims that those policyholders are left with when that company goes out of business, goes under. And surplus companies do not have that. They are, I refer to them sometimes as the cowboys of the insurance world.
Okay.
They'll go where others fear to tread, and such as the high-risk offshore oil and gas business we have so much of, the refineries and chemical plants that line our Mississippi River and the Gulf Coast, our ports, which are high-risk, high-dollar activities. That coverage is really only available in the surplus lines market, Lloyd's of London and other surplus lines companies.
Right.
All of that results in us being the 5th largest premium-paying surplus lines state in America, with only the 4 biggies of New York, California, Texas, and Florida having more surplus lines business than we have.
Now that's an interesting little fact.
We're an outlier there, and we are very dependent because of our high risk
Right.
On that cowboy market of
The
insurers.
cowboy market, they're hoping nothing goes wrong, but they get the high rates in the meantime.
Exactly. They get paid well, and they take on high risk. One of the things that Lloyd's of London insures that's interesting is thoroughbred race horses, because again, high risk, and they have been providing that coverage primarily in Kentucky to the breeders and the owners of racehorses for decades, many decades, and of course they got their start ensuring shipping interest and
exactly.
Traveling around the globe.
So a question that came to mind when you were talking about your legislation and now these insurance companies, and you compared some of our other states around us, do insurance companies like legislation like this, your first one? Do they feel more comfortable when they can look at legislation that is restraining, say, insurance commissioners or restraining government in such a way? Does it create a better environment for them to be attracted to?
They do. Almost all insurance companies say repeatedly through their representatives, we just want to know what the rules are. Mm-hmm. And if you'll tell us what the rules are, we can adjust, accommodate to those rules. We can price in accordance with the cost of complying with those rules. Just tell us what the rules are. That's all we want. And we don't want political interference and chicanery and all that. And so to your question, yes, they do appreciate the legislation. Now, do they want more regulation? No way.
No way.
Nobody does. But they recognize the fact that I am here to protect consumers, in particular in a crisis situation like we have so many of in our state, as prone as we are to hurricanes, to flooding events, and as prone as everyone else is to pandemics and other natural disasters.
So those cowboy insurance companies and the other guys can say, hey, look, these guys believe in just the right amount of legislation and the right amount of regulation to be able to restrain and control an environment that's favorable to not just the people buying insurance and bring down low rates, but also for insurance companies to do business and be attracted to help offer that.
Affordable and available.
I like that.
Yes, it's on our plaque downstairs.
I'm going to take a picture of that before I leave.
That's what our responsibility is.
What other legislation you see have a couple big ones?
Interestingly, also as an outlier, much larger than our size, as I said, in the surplus market, we are fifth largest consumer of the 50 states of Lloyd's of London business and the rest of the surplus lines market. We are also the state most benefited in America by the National Flood Insurance Program. Since its inception, we have collected $17 billion in paid losses. You and I live in Jefferson Parish. We can speak to the fact that we have 100-year floods every 5 years in Jefferson Parish.
Well, it's the beginning and the end of the 100 years.
Exactly. it's part of living in paradise.
Southern Louisiana.
Exactly. It comes with it. But we have benefited from the National Flood Insurance Program more than any other state in America. The second best benefited now is Texas, and that's as a result of Hurricane Harvey. I said we've collected $17 billion. Texas is now around $15 billion, up from under 12 before Harvey flooded Houston here a couple years back. And Florida's number 3 at 10 or 12 billion. New Jersey, New York, Superstorm Sandy are in the same range as Florida. But the point is, we need that program more than any other state in America. We have 500,000 policies. Texas has 500,000 policies in the National Flood Insurance Program. Florida has 1.5 million policies in the program, but it has benefited us more than any of those. So I have a bill in the hopper for this session to make it easier and more attractive for private flood insurance companies to come do business in our state. I'm copying this concept from something Florida did a few years back, also making it more user-friendly for private flood companies to come to our market. And the basic part of that proposal is to change the rate regulation system for private flood policies from a prior approval structure, as we have in our state, Florida has in their state, to a file and use structure. Difference being, in the 16, 18 states that have prior approval for all property and casualty insurance policies, homeowners, auto insurance, workers' comp, and private flood, we are one of the 16 or 18 states that you have to get approval for your rate proposals when you go into that business, and for any changes thereafter before you can use those new rates or adjusted rates.
Right.
In most states, 3 dozen, they have file and use. Companies are allowed to file their rates with the department, but not wait for approval, and then put them in place and start selling their product in accordance with those rates that have been filed at the department but not reviewed and approved. That's the most common structure, but not our structure. And in this case of this legislation, to attract private insurers to our market, we're copying what Florida did 2-3 years ago and changed from a prior approval structure to a file and use structure. South Carolina has also done it, and it has attracted to Florida 25 new private insurers writing private club coverage in their state. In South Carolina, they went all the way from prior approval to use and file. What that means, and it's common in about a half dozen states, is you don't even have to file it before you use it. You go out and use it and then file it.
Okay.
The least strict regulation of rates. And with South Carolina, they went to that for private flood and have attracted 41 new companies to their market. But it's also a fact that in both of those states, neither one of them have seen a lot of writing. They have 2 dozen companies in Florida, 41 in South Carolina, and they're writing, but not writing an awful lot. Don't know if it's because of their hesitancy to get started, or if they just can't compete with the, frankly, subsidized rates that the National Flood Insurance Program has in their states as well as ours. Leading me to tell consumers in our state, and I'll be doing it in a statewide tour as we head into another hurricane season next month, predicted by Colorado State University recently to be an active season.
Active as last year or more?
Not
You're going to be really active.
Not the historic level of activity isn't predicted that we saw last year, but it is more than average, and expected, if I recall correctly, to have 18 or so named storms, and a handful, 5 or 6, reaching hurricane status, and one making landfall in the U.S. somewhere on the Atlantic or Gulf Coast as a major hurricane.
So it sounds to me like this legislation that you're talking about coming out right here at the beginning of hurricane season helps Louisiana make it affordable and accessible.
Exactly, absolutely.
And what I'm also curious about, a question that came to mind a few minutes ago, was that could it be that even though Louisiana is that average state, and Texas and Florida, or as you look at the map, Florida and Texas on either side of us, could it be that the reason why they don't have as many, they have not benefited from the national flood protection like we have, because they already have laws like this where they're drawing on their private insurance companies and not the national flood insurance?
Not really.
Okay.
Because Texas hasn't changed their law at all. There's still prior approval like we are. And keep in mind, the National Flood Insurance Program, it's called insurance, but it's really a FEMA program.
Okay.
And we don't regulate those rates at all.
Okay.
They're set by FEMA and are set on
Okay.
a different basis than all other forms of insurance. Other forms of insurance are generally based upon an evaluation, generally based on look back at losses and claims and payments for 2 or 3 years in the past, projecting that into the future. In the case of the National Flood Insurance Program, it's all about levees and elevation and pumping capacity and those sorts of things. So very different, not really insurance. It's a government program. The private insurers are insurance, and they, in Texas and Louisiana today, have to get prior approval for their rates. Texas has not changed that and has nothing pending to do so. Florida changed it 3-4 years ago and has seen 25 companies come to write some private flood coverage in their state. But I dare say, I would guess, due to the fact that they have a hard time competing with the National Flood Insurance Program, subsidized as it is, that has limited the effectiveness of this new law in Florida. Companies have come, they're poised and ready to go into competition, but they're still hesitant to write at coverage prices, at prices for that coverage that are competitive with the National Flood Insurance Program.
Which is why we need this kind of legislation.
Absolutely. Now, also part of that is looming on the horizon is something that was put together by the Trump administration called Nfip 2.0, National Flood Insurance Program 2.0. And it is not yet unveiled. It was set to be unveiled at last fall when the Trump administration pulled it back and said, we're going to hold off until next year. Some have said it was because of the terrible hurricane season that we all experienced last year. Others said it was because of the political environment and not wanting to show what this will contain and what it will mean to various states that are dependent on the National Flood Insurance Program. No one has seen it, so I can't tell you why they pulled it back, but now they are announcing just this week that it's about to be unveiled. And we're holding our breath here in Louisiana because, as I said, we're the most dependent state in America for that program. And it is subsidized still significantly. And if 2.0 brings about some of the rate increases that the original reauthorization 8 years ago proposed, called Biggert Waters, it would have rendered tens of thousands of properties in our state worthless overnight. And fortunately, the Congress went back into session and rolled back some of the draconian rate increases that Biggert Waters called for, or it would have had a more devastating effect on our state's property insurance market than Katrina did, because many properties would not have been able to afford the cost of flood insurance, therefore couldn't get mortgages backed by the federal government, which is 95% of all mortgages, so that the property would be rendered worthless as a result of the exorbitant increases in the cost of flood insurance.
What always comes to my mind when I'm talking to people and legislators is how to bring more business into Louisiana, and it's one of the questions I usually ask near the end. So I'm going to jump to that real quick before I ask a couple other questions, or just make the statement. You know, we're always looking for ways to bring business and industry into Louisiana, and it's a little piece of legislation like this that makes it sound like it's just another way to bring business and industry into Louisiana.
No question about it. It is an important aspect of our state's economy. The, again, affordability and availability of coverage for flood risk, which we are so vulnerable to.
And so my other question was about: is it the best way to increase competition in the insurance industry? This is one of those answers for that.
Absolutely.
What regulations pertaining to insurance are hurting Louisiana? Do you have any of those?
Well, yes, we
We have
do.
a few more minutes, I think, so I want to
do.
make sure we get some of the questions out.
And frankly, it is our tort system that I would point to first and foremost. Our rules that are different than other states. My take on what we can do that is best for attracting companies and businesses and jobs to our state is to make our insurance market similar to whatever extent we can to all the other states, so that companies most of them are doing business all across America, don't have to have a different set of processes, rules, what have you, to do business in Louisiana than they do everywhere else. And when we are an outlier and have different rules in place and requirements in place than other states, it's a detriment to our ability to attract insurance at affordable rates to Louisiana.
Because they'd rather stay away than have to learn a new system or hire a whole new staff on that. Which ones are helping us the most? And then after that, I have two more last questions. Which regulations are helping us the most?
Well, after Katrina, it was worse yet. But we've always been challenged in our property insurance market because of our vulnerability to hurricanes. And one of the things that was done immediately after Katrina in a special session called by then Governor Blanco is a statewide building code that made properties built after that, now 15 years later, properties retrofitted to that standard much more affordable, with on average 20% less cost of homeowners insurance or commercial property insurance than otherwise properties not built to that standard. That was a real benefit to our market and is still serving us well today.
I like that.
Yeah.
So so I'm asking I jump to this other question again one more time. What's the best way to bring more business and industry to Louisiana as it pertains to the insurance industry? Have we already covered the best one, or is there another good one out there?
I always say there's no silver bullet. There's no one answer thing that we can do to solve all of our problems. It takes Band-Aids, 1,000 Band-Aids, to make us competitive with the best of the other states that are attractive to companies as compared to ours. We're always going to be high risk. We have high risk activity that is very important to our state's economy. So that to the extent that we can have a trustworthy, transparent, and effective in the area of protecting consumers, while at the same time being very similar to the protections and restrictions in other states, we become more attractive to all forms of business, but certainly to insurance in particular.
And having that in mind, it makes it affordable and accessible.
Absolutely.
Going back to one of the things you've
That's
been
our job.
I like that.
That's what we're here for, together with protecting consumers in this area of very expensive, very vital, and very complicated part of their businesses and their home life. Insurance is vital in all aspects and sometimes intimidating to consumers when they have to delve into how much coverage they need, how much they can afford, and what's the best mix of that for their situation.
Commissioner, I want to thank you very much for your time.
I've enjoyed it.
I think
you.
I think there's a lot of good information that we've done today.
Absolutely.
And I want to thank you very much for your time, and I
Thank you,
appreciate it
William.
very much.
Look forward to seeing you back home.
Exactly. Well, everybody else, thank you very much for tuning in. I appreciate it. And again, it's always like share the video, share it's great information. And you can keep an eye on the legislation that the commissioner talked about today by going to legis.la.gov, and you can watch it there. You can watch the committee. And if you watch the committees, you'll probably see him there, I'm sure. Thank you very much, and y'all have a great day.